Marvel Snap just announced the largest series drop they have ever done. Let's take a look at every card going from Series 4 to Series 3 and then Series 5 to Series 4 and see how generous this series drop actually is. Let's start with the cards going to Series 3. Null is a staple in Destroy decks. Destroy decks are not the greatest decks on Earth, but it is nice that a staple Destroy card is going down to Series 3, because in my head, I still think of Destroy as this easy-to-build Series 3 only deck that it really hasn't been in a while. Notably, X-23 not going to Series 3, but everyone who plays the game should have just gotten at least a free X-23 variant, which would allow you to play the deck. I enjoy the idea of Destroy as a mostly free-to-play deck, if not entirely free-to-play, and I think Null going to Series 3 is a good way to reinforce that. This is a card that is mostly only played in a pure Deadpool and Wolverine Destroy style deck, but we'll see if it manages to find other applications once there is a wider group of people who have it. This is also a card that has been in so many spotlight caches that I expect it to be a very minimal addition to Series 3. A lot of people are already going to have this guy. A lot of people already got him for free a couple weeks ago. Zabu is one of the best cards in the game, I think quietly. I think a lot of people don't realize just how good this card is, how powerful it is, and the reason it's so powerful is that this is a card that has a lot of utility while not giving up a ton in terms of power. Most 1-drops people play are going to have about 2 power anyway. When they get a little bit bigger than that, you're getting into the Hydra Bob range at 1/4, but the gap between 2 and 4 is the kind of thing that you can make up with a 1 energy discount on a much bigger card, and that means that Zabu is typically one of the better mid-rangey 2-drops in the game. 1-drops, of course, and this is a card that has a ton of synergy. There are Zabu decks that are playing, for example, Shang-Chi, Enchantress, Galacta, and Gwenpool. There are Zabu decks that are playing Man-Thing, Anti-Venom, and Malekith. And so Zabu gets to sort of be a mid-rangey bridge card that is good enough as a 1-drop, but not something you need to win lanes, and also provides you advantage in the late game, giving you more explosive and surprising final turns by discounting what is normally a 4-drop into being a 3-drop, allowing you to play it alongside other cards. A lot of 4-drops are typically balanced such that you are not supposed to be able to play them or play multiple of them per turn. And so on turn 6, if you're playing 2 4-drops, you're playing 2 cards that are meaningfully strong and meaningfully able to win lanes. That's always been what Zabu is about, and I'm glad they got back to it with this redesign of the card. This might be the best card dropping to Series 3. Modok is an absolute discard staple. There has not been a discard deck really that existed without this card in it. It is the thing that defines a deck as being a discard deck, honestly. Like, the decks that are discard decks that don't run Modok are so clearly their own archetype that is distinct from a discard deck, like Hela, for example, that they don't even count as being discard decks. They're just a secret other thing. And this is a great card to drop to Series 3. One that I am overwhelmingly happy to see finally drop, because this is a card that has a sort of vast amount of synergy with early pool cards like Apocalypse, like most of the discard package, and the fact that it was sort of paywalled for so long is a bad thing. This is another card that's just old enough that I think a lot of people are already going to have it, but objectively speaking, this is a great card to have drop into Series 3 because it makes a pure build-around archetype like discard that much more attainable. One of the things that I really haven't liked about recent Marvel Snap, so not necessarily design, but like the intersection of design and pricing, is that discard has gone from a free-to-play deck to a deck that requires like 5 Series 4 and 5 cards, and having less of those cards be Series 4 and 5 is closer to my vision of what I think these build-around decks should be. To me, I think these build-around decks should be like pretty good, but not tier 1 and mostly free-to-play, and getting Modok into Series 3 where it is free-to-play is a great way to make that happen. Nimi Roddy Piper is a pretty bad card, honestly. A card that I was legitimately a little bit surprised to see was still in Series 4. I think we all have our own little conspiracy theories in the back of our head that they just drop all the bad cards, and frankly, if they've been dropping bad cards for this long, it is a little shocking to me that this guy is still in Series 4 to even be dropped right now. He's not very good. Usually he sees play in the context of maybe like a Galactus thing. Maybe you're doing Shuri Nimrod as a backup in your Phoenix Force deck. That hasn't been very popular for a while, but it is like typically how the card is used. The card is not amazing. You can do Destroyer stuff with it. You can do Merge Symbiote Spider-Man stuff with it. There's cool stuff here. It's just rarely actually going to be tier 1 because the point output typically isn't worth what you're putting in to get it. It can do big point outputs, but so can a lot of other decks, and a lot of other decks do it in a lot less clunky way. And so Nimrod ends up being a solidly meme tier card most of the time. This is a good drop. Ghost Spider has sort of existed as this why is this expensive card for a while. It's not actually that much better than Iron Fist. They've already released Aranya as a one-drop move staple that costs you money. I don't really see a good argument for Ghost Spider being this expensive. It is now no longer going to be expensive at all. This is just a card that I can easily see a new player getting and being like, I don't care about this at all. And that's a totally reasonable thing to think because Ghost Spider is much like Modok, much like Null, a card that is sort of archetype specific. This goes in the move deck and it goes nowhere else mostly, and that is a fine place for a card to be, but it's a bad place for a card that costs money to be, and I think dropping Ghost Spider is a smart decision. Just glad to see another card in a fairly linear deck, and not in terms of playstyle, but in terms of what am I going to go collect? When I talk about linear decks here, I'm talking about linear in terms of collection. Oh, I just go get every card that says destroy. Oh, I just go get every card that says move. Oh, I just go get every card that says discard on it, right? You could do that, and I want them to reward you for doing that to some degree, and one way of making that happen is by dropping some of these staple cards down. Nebula is a fairly unique card, although among one-drops, I won't say it's been power crept so much as it's just not necessarily needed for your one drop to scale to this degree. There are better scalers, and you typically get more bang for your buck investing in a better scaler than Nebula when you have more control over, but it's a very solid card that will see play occasionally. This is a card that I won't call it a metagame staple per se, but every 2 months or so, there will be a good deck playing this card, and just getting it for free is a boost to almost every player's collection, in my opinion. Just a solid drop, again. Here's where the they only drop garbage comes back into play, because Silk is just a terribly unplayable card, and I don't think it's really her fault. It's just that, why would you play a 2/5 that you don't know where it's gonna go when you could play Sam Wilson, when you could play Scream? God forbid you play this into a Scream. You just instantly lose the game, right? And so I think that this card is just a victim of the fact that if you want to be a good 2-drop right now, you have to be a 2-drop that scales and has synergy with the deck. Silk does not scale. I mean, maybe they could make her scale when she moved, but that actually feels pretty risky too. This is a card that they could redesign, but it's also I'm not sure what the upside on redesigning it would be. And I think it's remarkable how just a 2/5 has gotten so much worse because of, since the last time Silk was a dominant card, this was before we had a lot of the scalers that we have now. We didn't have Thena. We didn't have Scream. We didn't have Sam Wilson combining with Kraven. We didn't have Iron Patriot, which technically not a scaler, but being realistic plays a lot like one. These are cards that have just made it kind of awful to play a card like this. It just hasn't been a good idea. And because of that, she just doesn't show up anywhere. Spider-Ham is a very unique card. There are basically no cards that do what Spider-Ham does. He can do stuff in games that no other card can. He does something incredibly special only to him. His weird interactions with Mobius and with Luke Cage are extremely fascinating. There's just a bunch of weird stuff that this card does. Sorry, I forgot. They got rid of the Luke Cage one, but his weird interactions with Mobius and Shadow King, I should say, are extremely fascinating. This is a card that is almost deliberately by design a card that is weird and is awkward. It's not the most played card. I think the best place you're going to find for a card like this is either going to be in a bounce deck doing traditional bounce stuff, or in a Pixie deck where it is one of the 1-drops that you swap out with Pixie stuff. It's not amazing, and I think one of the weird things about this card is it doesn't scale with being bounced the way a lot of other stuff does. But there are certain metagames that call for, I need a way to disrupt my opponent, and Iceman is not going to do it. And this card will do it. Lady Deathstrike is a great card to drop. I'm actually really happy to see this one because this is a card that, to me, does not get enough attention as a good option. I think because a lot of people just don't own her. This is a card that has very rarely been worth going out and purchasing, but it's very commonly been a card that I actually wish that would be playable a little bit more. And what I mean by that is, like, when we get into these sort of Doom 2099, Mobius M. Mobius, Luke KG metagames, Lady Deathstrike can be one of the only cards that is meaningfully able to interact with that stuff. She is very powerful against early game scalers. She can be very good if you're an RSM deck looking to answer certain cards. The more small stuff people are playing, the better off she is. This is a legitimately good card, and the more like face-up Mobius style tech cards there are, the more like Doom 2099s there are, the better she'll get. This is a card that I'm actually very glad is dropping to Series 3. Mobius is a bit of a fascinating card because I don't really think he's doing his job very well. He has fundamentally poor cube equity because if you play him, he has to be face up to start actually impacting the board, which means your opponent will never actually be caught off guard by him on turn 6, the way they can be caught off guard by things like Shang-Chi or Cosmo. This means that Mobius is going to be worse at doing his job than basically every other tech card is at doing theirs, and that's fine, I guess, because I think this is a very hated effect. I just don't think his job is one that is getting done well, and his job is basically, I would like to prevent people from cheating. But when you look at Mobius at 3-3, and then you look at what he's trying to stop, which is like a Skaar deck from getting a 0-10, and in the process of getting a 0-10, they're playing a 3-11, a 4-10, a 5-10, and you're playing a 3-3, it's like, oh, okay, he's not good enough at actually stopping decks that play good cards and also cheat energy. He just isn't good enough at doing that, right? Like, okay, I'll play my Mobius to prevent the Iron Patriot going off, but they played a 2-3, I played a 3-3, and then their 3-cost card is bigger than mine because it's not a 3-3, right? And so you almost always end up down on board when you're investing in this card, which means that the only places you can really play him are with other engines that can sort of make up for that. And you see that with the Doom 2099 ongoing deck, where Spectrum can make him a little bit bigger, or you see him being played in the Victoria Hand card generation shell, where you can just use that to make up for the point difference of having to play this guy. And that is ultimately the issue that I think he has, but it's also possible he has a further issue, which is no one wants to spend 3,000 tokens on a card that's pretty mid, but if you have it for free, you might actually explore it a little bit more. So it's possible that this is not an issue of it's hard to actually find a deck that can justify him, but more that it's not a lot of people necessarily own the card. I'm interested to see which one it is. Havok is not a great card, but he is a card, and you can play this card in reasonable decks. A lot of people have been playing Havok recently because they were trying to take the Havok deck and jam Adam Warlock in there. I remain convinced that that's a bad idea. That's just not really what you want to do. The Havok deck is better without Adam Warlock, and yes, I am calling it the Havok deck. The Bast Thena Agent Venom deck, that's really the right way to describe it, in my opinion. Havok has arisen as the dominant version of this deck ever since the nerfs to Agent Venom, which prevented Mystique and Mobius, or it's not Mystique and Mobius, Mystique and Iron Man from being a real meaningful part of the deck. If you're trying Mystique and Iron Man in the Agent Venom deck, you're not going to want to play Havok, but I do think the Havok build is better. It is able to output a large amount of points, play relevant 3-drop interaction to the metagame, and customize itself to whatever needs to happen. This is one of those few shells where it just has enough points that you can make the interaction in the deck be what you need, whether that be Red Guardian and Cosmo, Mobius and something else. You can make this deck have the correct tech for the metagame, and you will usually be in a pretty okay spot. The metagames that are bad for this deck are ones where things are just going way over the top of it. That's not always going to happen, but it can. Most recently happened with Move Bounce, where this deck was just doing the same thing as Move Bounce, but with less points. And that is a bad spot for this deck to be in. But other than that, this deck has been a pretty consistent contender since Move Bounce came out, and I can understand why it wouldn't be worth buying Havok, so getting him for free is a pretty solid buff to that deck. This card is mostly unplayable, and frankly, it's shocking that she wasn't already in Series 3 because of how unplayable she is. This card is mostly unplayable, and frankly, it's shocking that he wasn't already in Series 3 because of how unplayable he is. So those are the cards that are moving to Series 3. On the whole, I am happy with the volume of them. This is far more cards going to Series 3 than I ever expected, and when it comes to evaluating these, the only thing I really care about is volume. How much cheaper is the game getting? What is that chunk that we are benefiting here? Getting 13 cards into Series 3 is the biggest and best thing that any series drop can do for us. My opinion, actually, is that it doesn't matter too much going from Series 5 to Series 4. That's like the kind of thing where it's like, it can matter in very specific contexts, and there are going to be some of those that are worth talking about, which we're going to jump into just in a second. But the major part of every series drop is what's going into Series 3, and the major determinant of how good I think the series drop is how many cards are going into Series 3, because it is a numbers game. They keep making more cards, so we need more cards to drop. And so this is the first time I've been like, yeah, I actually am happy with the amount of cards dropping to Series 3. Assuming we get even like close to a regular schedule similar to this, I think we're on a genuine path to sustainability. That doesn't mean that we're gonna get there immediately. It's sort of like the national debt. You balance the yearly budget, assuming you want to do that. I don't really want to get political here, but there's a lot of arguments against the idea that we actually need to do that. That's beside the point. The point I'm trying to make here is, in the 90s, Bill Clinton balanced the budget, right? Which is the deficit, the yearly, right? And that did not balance out the debt, which is the total amount, but it meant so that the debt was going down yearly, right? We kind of want Marvel Snap to get a little bit closer to that. If they keep making more cards and they keep not dropping as many cards, what's going to happen is there's going to be roughly infinite series bloat, and that is what happened. And so because of that, I really just care about how many cards are dropping, and I think this is a good number. Now on to the Series 5 to 4s. Loki is nominally unplayable. Right now, I can't think of a deck where I would really want to run him except maybe Thanos Arishem, which isn't a very good version of the Arishem deck. Fun card, enjoyable card, not going to do what it used to do, not going to live up to its own legacy at this point, and I think a lot of the time people are going to be very grateful for that, but me, I'm a little bit sad to see this card actually get killed. It's very rare that they actually kill a card. Like, there are not a lot of cards that it's like, wow, this used to be amazing, and now it is complete crap, where, like, it's because they killed the card and not because of, like, power creep or whatever. Like, Lizard used to be amazing. Loki is one of those cards, and it does sort of make me sad. Blob has been cut even from most Arishem decks at this point. I think the move from 15 to 13 was too much. I think it should go back to 15. I would like to see everyone's favorite fat boy back in the metagame, personally. Obviously, it's cool that it's getting dropped in series, but I'd like to see it get some real attention paid to it. This is not a card that is dead, per se. Like, you could still play it in the deck. It's just that Arishem has limited spots and, like, kind of doesn't want another big guy. A Silver Surfer staple, it's always nice to see a deck like Surfer get a little bit cheaper. Sebastian Shaw is mostly run in that context. There have been some rumblings of like merge Shaw decks, but it typically ends up being better to merge onto something that is going to send power to other lanes like Symbiote Spider-Man, which is kind of an indictment of Shaw, but he is still an excellent Silver Surfer card. Solid drop here. This was the card that everyone got as a Christmas gift, which it should be worth saying is like pretty cool, but it's also not surprising that, hey, we gave everyone Elsa. Let's drop her down from Series 5 to Series 4 at this point, because clearly if we're willing to give everyone an Elsa, it's not really a card that's necessarily going to be commanding a lot of demand at this point. She's okay. I think she's mostly been power crept by Galacta, but that's alright. You're allowed to get power crept by Galacta. That's fine. This is still like a relatively reasonable card. I wonder if they could make it a 2-cost again? Like go 2-2, same effect? I think they probably could, given how strong 2 costs are right now, but I'm not sure it's necessarily something they would want to do. Just if they're keeping their eyes open for potential buffs, Elsa 2-2, maybe. Miss Marvel was at one point one of the best cards in the game, but I don't really think that is because that it is now no longer that because they nerfed it. I rather think that this card, much like Lizard, is a victim of power creep. The metagame where Miss Marvel was one of the best cards in the game was one where we did not have good early game cards. It is just that fundamentally serious, right? We simply did not have good early game scalers. They had just killed Angela. We didn't have cards that were big. Well, the point ceiling of the game was pretty low unless you were doing like Thanos-y type stuff. So if you wanted to build a mid-range deck, Miss Marvel was actually just like the best bang for your buck play. And since then, they've released dozens and dozens and dozens of incredibly powerful cards that fill a, not exactly that role, but like are sort of complementary to that, right? They had just nerfed Elsa and Werewolf, I believe, and also Angela. And so we just didn't have a thing to build around, right? They nerfed Angela, we went to Werewolf. They nerfed Werewolf, we went to this. And then they nerfed this, and then right about that time, we started getting, like, the other mid-rangey cards that we were supposed to build around. And that is sort of what happened to this card, right? Because like, okay, they nerfed her, and then suddenly we had, you know, Blob, right? We had Blob as like a Thanos card. We had a unnerfed Blob running into January. In March, we got Mockingbird and Hope Summers, which meant Thanos was running rampant, and that could have early game scaling in that sort of way. And so Miss Marvel never really sort of recovered from that nerf, right? Not only did they make her worse, they also sort of made a bunch of cards that made her it made it impossible for her to ever be as good as she was. Basically, she released in like the exact perfect time period for her, like actual apex of possibility, like 100th percentile luck, basically, and then sort of fell down and down and down and down and down. I don't know if it would be safe to just take her restriction off. It might actually be at this point. Another sort of scaling victim, right? This card was elite when it came out, which is around the time Miss Marvel came out, and that was before we had, like, if you look at a deck from right now, there are like 5 2-drops that are better than this guy, and he's a 3-drop, right? And so you just have a deck that is like, all right, you know, this is cool or whatever, but like, he's just not worth investing in at this point. This card is not good, and it's not far off from playable. Like, when I say that these cards are bad, it's because there's better options, and it's not like they have to be better by that much, right? Like, you don't have to be better than Werewolf by Night by that much to be better. You just have to be better than it by a little, and then it won't be worth playing the Werewolf by Night. And so I don't want people to look at this like Werewolf by Night and Miss Marvel and be like, oh, these are unplayable now. It's not that. It's just that there are sort of definitively better options, which means that it is very hard to justify playing these cards. So like unplayable, not in the sense of like, oh my God, they're ass. They're not ass. They're like 2 points off, right? Like that's not really what I'm trying to say. But like a card that is a 317 or whatever, you know, that's going to be more valuable than a card that is a 315. And it's like, that's really what's happening to these cards right now. These are also sort of like, Wolf especially is also a bit of an Iron Patriot victim, where it's like, if you're playing Iron Patriot, you kind of can't play this guy to follow up an Iron Patriot, and you're just like, oh, well, shit, that makes it really sad. There's also like the fact that like, you know, if you're playing Sam Wilson, one of the most recently released cards, you're not really wanting to do this. He doesn't go with any of the other scalars, where like one of the strengths of like a Scream deck right now is that you get to play all those scalars together. You get Sam Wilson, you get Kraven, you get Scream, you get a bunch of different scalars that all are 2-drops and all work together and all go up, right? And then Wolf is typically the only scalar in his decks because he doesn't play well with others, which is good flavor, but there are multitudes of issues with this card. But I'm trying to get the point across that it's like, it's not actually this card's fault, it's the context surrounding him. This is still a pretty baseline strong card. Actually fairly surprised they let this guy drop. He's really good right now. Surtur Skaar is one of the 5 best decks in the game at minimum, probably better. And this is a very key part of it. There are basically 2 good cards in that deck. They are Surtur and Skaar. Everything else is a role player. And by role player, I mean like the cards that actually spike your win rate are Surtur and Skaar. So this is a great opportunity for people to pick up this. It's almost at the point where it's like, I wonder if they're going to nerf it. That's like my conspiracy brain is like, all right, they're dropping this. I think they're looking at a nerf, baby. It's coming. It's coming. Black Knight has rarely been the best thing to do, if ever. It is a fun card to have. It's a great card to have in Series 3 because it'll let people mess around with him a little bit more. Typically, the Black Knight decks have been trying to ride a line between being all-in combo and like being mid-rangey. It's not a great spot for it to be. When this card was good, that was when the Ebony Blade had both protections from both Shang-Chi and Shadow King. Without that, I think it's a lot harder to be willing to invest what it takes to get value out of Black Knight. Not a bad card, but the only way it was good was when the thing it made was 100% invulnerable to basically everything, which probably means it shouldn't have existed in that form, right? Like, I think that's just like, if the only way to make this card good is to say that counterplay to it doesn't exist, it's probably a bad card to make good. And I think that's sort of where Black Knight exists right now. Corvus Glaive, Hela staple, like the Hela staple, lets Hela play both as a Hela deck and as a sort of ramp deck, where this card is just able to be the card that ramps you into 6-drop, 6-drop, and you try to win that way if you are not able to play Hela. This is the best card in Hela decks, probably, and I think it is nice to actually see him drop down a little bit. Cull Obsidian, I mean, this is a good card to drop in Sam season, let me tell you that. Because if you are thinking about picking up Cull Obsidian, you are definitely going to need to pick up Sam Wilson because they go together like peanut butter and jelly. Not a real movie synergy tie-in moment. There's no team-ups between Thanos' Black Order and Sam Wilson, but hey, in Marvel Snap, anything can happen, and this card just got the biggest piece of help it's had ever in the fact that Sam Wilson puts a 1-drop on the board for free, and you just get to play Cull Obsidian. This card is a fairly specific card, but it is a banger. It is a great card, and that is a very good card to have a little bit cheaper because it means that more people may be able to justify buying this as the last card in a deck. Very specific. Again, like, you kind of only want this guy if you have ways of, like, making sure that you are able to clog at least one other lane. But if you have that, he's basically like an unbeatable god. And that's a really cool card. It's been a while since Annihilus was good, and there's multiple reasons for that, but I think the main one is just they sort of kept making cards that allow you to fill lanes and not actually feel bad about getting Annihilus. And then the secondary one is there's just decks that go really, really tall now, and Annihilus is best when, like, the metagame is fairly minimal in terms of output. Like, what this card is really good at doing is beating a deck that plays 1 card a turn. That's what Annihilus is meant to do. But now, all those decks that play 1 card a turn are, like, also Doom 2099 decks. And it's like, okay, sure, you sent over your -9. That's awesome. But, like, you need some other stuff. Like, you need to be doing other clog stuff, dude. And so he no longer gets to be, like, a splash package and stuff, which is a lot of what his utility was at the time. Like, when decks were like reasonably getting to like 20 power in some lanes, this guy's amazing. But when decks are getting to 30, or when they're getting to like 25 in every lane, you just care a lot less about what he's doing. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for making it through that video. I keep telling myself I'm gonna stop acting like watching my videos is a chore, but it is, and you passed. Thank you for doing that chore for me. I really appreciate it. You have a good one. Let me know what you think about the series drops. As always, I've been KM Best. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.